Good morning. Welcome to today's edition of the Coal Scene. I'm Chris Hamilton with the West Virginia Coal Association, and I'll be your host for today's program. Joining me in the studio is Mr. Joel Watts. Joel is the administrator for the Board of Coal Mine Health and Safety, which for all intent and purposes has the legislative responsibility of overseeing and regulating coal mine health and safety. Joel's been in that position for the past 10 years, and the board recently experienced a major consolidation and reorganization this past legislative session, which we'll get into here momentarily. Joel, very nice to see you, and thanks so much for joining me here in the studio.
It's my pleasure, Chris.
I think the general topic of coal mine health and safety is one that concerns a lot of people, and you play a very important role. You've been in that role, as I indicated, for a decade now, and you've done just a masterful job quarterbacking that process and keeping everything in order that the board does.
Well, thank you, Chris. Yeah, it's been a long decade. We've overseen a lot of things, and with the new changes from this legislative session, I think we've got some more time ahead of us to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I was thinking as we were talking prior to the show here, it occurred to me that this board was originally created, back when you had a high number of accidents and a high number of injuries, resulting from mining. There was probably 50, 60,000 coal miners working around the state. I think the board had its origin in 1977.
Yeah, that was a year before I was born.
All of a sudden, there's a 40-year history with this board, which is really remarkable.
Yeah, and in looking past the reports, there's been a lot of reports, a lot of substantial fatal reports, and over the years it's tracked downward. And of course now with the present state of the industry after 8 years of attacks, it's a little different than it was 40 years ago.
Oh, I tell you, the mining industry has almost been revolutionized over that period of time. Might want to start with before the reorganization this year, the fundamental purpose of the board. I recall reading some of the background information, and it seems like it's very clear that the legislature wanted to put the critical role or responsibility of regulating coal mine health and safety into the hands of mine safety professionals and experts. They were dealing with a lot of issues here in the Capitol, and that they weren't as familiar with that they wanted to be. So they create a board, have an equal number of United Mine Workers safety professionals, coal industry professionals, and charge the board with regulating mine health and safety.
Yeah, and part of that history was to explore new technology, to explore new methods of training. Of course, that spun off into other things as well. But the history of it was interesting. I was talking to former Governor Tomblin the last day of his term, and he was telling me about how he helped to orchestrate the creation of this coal board because it kept overpowering the legislative session. And now we can meet once a month or so and come up with some good regulations that help to keep the coal mines safe and keep us going.
Interesting, you mentioned former Governor Earl Ray Tomblin. I had the opportunity to work with him in his role as governor, also as Senate President. And this will date both of us, but going back to the late '80s, he was actually in charge of the Senate Energy, Industry, and Mining Committee, and we were working together. That was following the creation of the board, but it was still somewhat in the earlier days. and he was very much involved with the the creation and earlier days of the Board of Coal Mine Health and Safety. I forgot about that, but yeah, that kind of tracks us both back a few years. But the legislatures always maintain a close engagement with the board, but have, for the most part, been content with the board doing a lot of the regulation and legislation over the industry.
Yeah, and it's one of the few boards in the state, if not the only board in the state, that does not have legislative review. So we could file a rule, and it does not have to go to the legislature to be approved.
Well, it is interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes the board, a very powerful board.
It is one of the most powerful boards, and I think it's necessary. The legislature had a lot of foresight to give the mining professionals, the stakeholders, and of course the legislature can review it, but it's not mandatory like all the other boards.
I think if I'm not mistaken, there's some precedent for the legislature to look at some of the rules that come out of the board.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they did that this last time. As a matter of fact, they extended the date on a couple of things, and they have in the past as well taken up issues. But that's initiated by the legislature, not through a process.
I know, looking through the catalog of rules that the board has promulgated throughout its history, they are very diverse. They seemingly address practically every issue or every job that you're likely to encounter, both underground and on surface mining operations. They deal with roof control, ventilation, haulage. A couple instances where they were dealing with new mining methods as they were introduced, like longwall mining. And I think West Virginia might be one of the only states that has a comprehensive set of longwall mining regulations.
We do, and we also have shortwall mining regulations still in there. We have regulations about gas lamps. As a matter of fact, it's still in there. So we do. It's a very comprehensive set, starting in the late 70s and going. I think we filed our last one last year. So it's kind of an ongoing process, but it touches every aspect of West Virginia coal mining.
Don't want to catch you off guard, but what was the rule last year? Do you recall? Haulage, was it?
We had some haulage, but we also had the ambulance rule. So we had to file an ambulance rule that required some surface mine operations to post directions to construction sites and things like that, so the ambulances could get there. And we also filed some amendments to the drug policy lately. And our last biggest one was the proximity detection.
And that's a rule that required proximity detection technology on certain machines, so they would give warning and maybe even de-energize before a miner got in a pinch point.
That's right. And it was on certain equipment in certain situations, and we established timelines for those who already had it, those who were buying new equipment, and of course an extended timeline for everybody to have it. And that's been extended until next year.
Okay. If I'm not mistaken, that dovetails with a rule, a very similar rule that was promulgated or enacted by the Federal Mine Health and Safety Administration.
It is, and that was enacted after we did ours, and so this is a way to kind of catch up a little bit and to give the industry some time to, and it also helps to balance those rules out, because you don't want to have two sets of rules talking about two different things with two different timelines. So it really helps, I think, the operators develop something that's cohesive.
I know the board's been sensitive, following the board very closely. It seems that the board is sensitive to the fact that there may be federal regulations governing the same topic, which is plausible. But on the other hand, if they're promulgating a rule based on a mining accident, they want to see that rule go forward and be implemented as well. So there's a fine line there that I know the board tries to accomplish. It wants to expedite its rulemaking, but also make sure those rules generally are compatible with federal law.
I think that's a good summation. Generally, they do. As a matter of fact, we're reviewing the rules according to the legislature now to see which ones are compatible with the federal guidelines, which ones may be more stringent or less stringent. So we expect to have that wrapped up in the end of October. And we're actually asking for comments now on all the rules from the industry, the stakeholders, and the public in general.
Yeah, I believe that rule or that piece of legislation went beyond the mining industry.
It did. It did. It's all areas that have executive rulemaking capability. And of course, the board falls under that. And we are reviewing those rules. And we've got a couple comments in. And we'll make a report to the legislature November 1. So any comments are appreciated.
So the agencies are charged with presenting a report to the legislature that identifies rules that are where there's a federal counterpart rule and where there's differences in those rules.
That's right. And it has to be more stringent. So we have to
Okay.
identify if it's more stringent. And some of the rules have no federal counterpart. And that's the easiest part.
Yeah.
But we do. So we have to look at proximity and is it more stringent or less stringent and let the legislature decide how to take that report.
This past legislative session, the legislature, in line with its thought of consolidating government and trying to save some of the state's budget or be more frugal with the expenditures. I know there was an effort to consolidate some of the boards that maybe were created some time ago into the Board of Coal Mine Health and Safety. I think the training board that was originally created to oversee implementation of the 40 and 80-hour apprenticeship programs, and mine inspectors board and task force that was all consolidated together.
That's right. And so the only two boards we have currently are the TRC, which is kind of like a committee of the board. And then we have the coal board itself. And we absorb the duties of the task force, which was charged primarily with exploring new technology. And it was created after SAGO. And the training board, and we absorbed that as well, which is, of course, maintaining training requirements and accepting alternative training plans.
I know we had, prior to the most recent legislative session, this consolidation that we're talking about, I know that there were 5 or 6 boards with different responsibilities impacting mining, but many had overlapping
yeah.
responsibilities. How's it working out with all of them being, consolidated into one?
So far, so good. We still have some kinks to work out on the mine examining issues. And working with the agency, we're going to start to develop some protocols on how to test for new inspectors or safety instructors. But as far as training board, we're receiving the same reports, and it's saving money and it's saving time. With the task force, it's the same thing. We're always open to receive new technology when new technology is available. So I don't know when that will be presented, but until then, we're still saving time and money.
So, the net result of the legislation consolidating the boards was to give you additional responsibilities and less pay, or you kept your pay the same.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that, but no, it's.
I think that's a trend in state government generally. I think everybody's being asked to do a little more.
Well,
with,
I think that
with the funding they have.
And one of the things I heard is that it helps to decrease the overlapping of duties. So the board has always been charged with looking for new technology. Well, now we don't have 2 areas of that. We have 1. And so the board is really just fulfilling the duty that it's always been charged with.
A lot of people listening, there's probably a lot of people that understand and have had some experience with one or more of these boards over the years. There's probably other people that are watching that are thinking that they knew that there were multiple boards and it was a little confusing.
Yeah.
Safety boards, probably safe to say, was always in charge with regulation, had some mine technology responsibilities. The training board, if I'm not mistaken, was created back like the safety board in the mid or late 70s. And its original charge was to sit in oversight of the apprenticeship programs as they were being administered and implemented statewide. And when you think about it, those were two major comprehensive programs that required for the first time comprehensive training for new miners going in the industry. 80 hours for underground miners, 40 hours for surface miners. And those were the first of its kind nationally. So that was a major undertaking then.
Yeah, and all these boards that have somehow ceased to exist have always contributed to the industry. But at some point, it's time to welcome everybody back into the fold, I think, and have that singular focus of taking on what those boards have done. The training board helped to develop several different certification programs. Now the coal board will continue that and monitor that and go on and hopefully carry on that responsibility into the future.
Someone pointed out to me that, again, the board goes back, the training board say, and it's very similar to the State Board of Education for the mining industry. It was the State Board of Miner Training, Education, Certification. And it was involved with the apprenticeship programs, the mine foreman certification, electrical certification. I think there was a whole list of certification and specialty types of jobs that required additional training and qualification that the board was in charge with.
Yeah, and at some point the board was looking at alternative ways of education. So whether it's virtual reality or electronic testing, things like that. The EMTI, or the EMTN now. And so the training board was kind of involved in some of that as well. And they try to come up with a couple different ways to present alternative testing. And I imagine once the coal board turns to focus on some of that, then we'll see some more development on how to provide for better testing for new applicants.
The other board, Joel, that was, I'm not even sure it was a board, but it was a task force. It's been 10 years ago now since we've had the terrible Sago accident, and I think one of the outcomes of that accident was a requirement nationwide that started here in West Virginia to have better communications, better mine rescue facilities, better escape facilities. And I'm certain that the task force was created about that time to oversee the implementation of the new communications systems, the underground shelters, all of the self-rescuers that were being deployed around the mine.
It was after Sago, during that time, Jim Dean, who's at WVU now, took over as acting director, and what he implemented inside the agency was a task force bringing together various stakeholders to explore new technology. Communications, shelters, tracking, and a few of those other particular things. The legislature then codified that and made it a almost separate task force within the agency. In 2010, it was handed to the coal board to oversee, and then of course last year or earlier this year, it was absorbed into the coal board.
Rolled right into the coal board.
Rolled into the coal board.
It seems like the way it was set up by design had a limited main purpose, to oversee the implementation of these rules 10 years ago and requirements, mine emergency training, but it also had some ongoing just research and trying to identify new technologies, which now the Board of Coal Mine Health and Safety is doing. Is that accurate?
And now the coal board will do it solely instead of having a couple different boards do it.
Okay.
So, we're kind of consolidating that time and that focus. So we're all doing it at one speed. I think the argument was that task force was initially set up with a time-limited scope. You know, they were trying to overcome SAGO and trying to look at better ways to help the issues that they identified during the SAGO investigation. And it looks like the task force greatly accomplished that mission.
The TRC you mentioned, again, another entity that has technology or technical within its title. It's the group looking over the material that is charged with having some involvement with anytime there's a variance request.
Yeah,
and you handle those too.
We do, and so it's a member of the industry, a member of the mine workers, and they come together, and once a company needs a variance request to keep it to operate, but keep it as safe as what the law would require, they present a variance. The TRC usually works with them to build that variance, approves the variance, gives it to the coal board, and then they can hopefully continue to operate. We've had some issues with that over the last couple of years, where we've had to do a lot of on-site investigations, but overall, you know, I think that the TRC is working to make sure that laws are obeyed, and when they cannot be, then some workarounds that are safe as, if not safer than, can be implemented.
Yeah, and I think it also allows for companies and mining firms to develop safer alternatives to things that to things that are spelled out or mandated very specifically in law.
Yes.
If they meet the same protections and level of safety.
Yeah, and you know, the TRC members have just for the last 10 years drilled it that it will be as safe as, if not safer. And every time we present a variance, it will always meet those high qualifications.
Boy, I tell you, there's a lot of areas of responsibilities that this board has.
Yeah.
You know, and your role is absolutely crucial in keeping all that moving forward, juggling all the issues that you have to juggle. I know you work very close with the director in the Office of Miners Health, Safety, and Training. No doubt you work close with MSHA and, you know, the federal agencies that have oversight over mining. And, you know, the whole area of mine safety remains, you know, I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where we are satisfied. As long as there's a single injury at a coal mine,
Yeah.
you know, we're going to look to see if there's ways to prevent that from occurring again. And I know that's, you know, that's embodied within the safety board's statute and, you know, its governing law. And it's, you know, it's been a good board. It's been a good addition to, you know, the world of mine safety, trying to reach that goal of having zero accidents.
I think you're right. And I think that what the coal board does is it gives everybody a chance, the stakeholders, to meet and discuss these things and really develop a consensus way of tackling some of these large and looming safety issues. You know, and they can work together, they can hopefully get along and make these things, and so far it seems to be successful.
You know, I don't believe any component or entity of government can be totally responsible for mine safety. I mean, mine safety is everybody's job or responsibility. It requires everybody working together. Being around the industry for a while now, you know, I know that at every mine you will find a team of safety professionals that work every single day, every single hour of every day, trying to make that mine safe. It's management representatives, it's you know, it's mine officials, it's employees. A lot of teamwork goes on, a lot of communications to try to improve. It's just a never-ending task, and the industry's done a remarkable job over the years addressing mine safety. And kudos to everybody. I don't think they receive enough credit. You know, the media today, not being critical of the media, but the media covers some of the undesirable events. That's what they focus on. They seldom focus on all the work that goes in every hour, every day of every week, month, year into the trying to keep the mining industry safe?
Well, for instance, proximity. When we were looking at proximity, we didn't go to labs. We went to underground mines that already had proximity in place. Same thing with cameras. And there are companies out there that are not associated with us, with